to the special meeting of Joint City Commission and Planning Commission, Tuesday, July 27th, to interview potential clients for architecture for the DPW building. So welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Barbara, could I have roll call, please?
Yes. Dennison, absent. Downey,
Here.
Money,
Present.
Swam, Eden,
Here.
Leeds, absent. Parker, absent. McDonald,
Here.
and Manal. Here. We have four.
Thank you very much. At this time, we will take public comments. Please keep your comments to the agenda items only, 3 minutes. Not seeing any public comments. We will move on to Wightman and their presentation. Thank you so much for taking the time to come in this evening.
Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
We are Wightman Associates.
Right.
I'd like to thank the Art Region and the City Commission and the Planning Commission for inviting us to interview here. My name is Chris Bryant. I'm an architect with Wightman. I've been there 38 years, and I'll be acting as a client representative for this project. I'm also a member of the Michigan's great Sustainable Business Forum, which we're having an event at River St. Joe on the 5th. I'd like to invite you all there. That's a public service plug. I have several reasons. For several reasons, Buchanan has been a very important place for me. And among those are I live a mile away, which is kind of nice. We have an Olympian, which is Hannah Roberts. We are officially the nicest city in America. And I have proof of that, which I'll bring up in just a second. It's not because of weed, or it's because of things like the people. It's the Buchanan Promise, and it's people like our city manager who almost ran me over the other day when I was riding my bike downtown. She jumped out of her car and she was trucking over. It looked like she was going to beat someone up, and she started picking up branches off the sidewalk and put them over the edge of the guardrail. So those are the reasons I like to live in Buchanan. And I really appreciate that kind of care of the city. I guess the other people, Carol and Casey, if I can introduce themselves.
Sure. Choked up. My name's Carl Baxmeyer, and while I can't claim to live as close as Chris does, I do live just over the line in Carriage-less subdivision, just north of South Bend. My tie to Buchanan is I went to Grand Valley, and my roommate there was Tom Gordon, who's been a long-time member. His mom was a teacher, his dad a builder, and so I first came to Buchanan the first weekend that I was at Grand Valley. And enjoyed being here and enjoyed living close. Did a lot of work for the schools the past 7 years. I'm a planner by profession, and I'm here. I'm not in the RFP. They kind of treat me like the crazy relative you lock away in the attic. But I snuck out, and the reason I'm here is I bring some specialized skills in terms of assessments and bond issues that I want to share with you, and I'll talk about them a little later.
Hi everyone, my name is Casey Bordeaux. I lead our interior design department at Wightman. I've been working in the interior design field for just over 12 years with a lot of different exposure and different types of projects. My tie to Buchanan is working with Chris. He has said nothing but complimentary things about this city. So I enjoy seeing the excitement in his face being involved in a project like this. My role on the project obviously would be an interior designer, but also if the project does move forward to be a full municipal complex versus just DPW, I would lead as the project manager as well.
Wightman is architectural, engineering, and surveying company. We've been in the area for 75 years. We have offices in Benton Harbor, which you serve out of the Benton Harbor office. We also have offices in Allegan, Roanoke, and Kalamazoo. This is the services we provide. It's kind of hard to read, but there's a lot there. We can go over that later. But the important things that our lead areas are architecture, engineering, surveying, and environmental. We're also going to, Our project team this year is going to be Wightman and Associates will handle the architectural services, the site design, the planning, and survey services. And we're teaming up with ME Design out of Mishawaka, and they're going to provide the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing services. The interior design services will also be provided with Ben Hardross along with landscape design.
So I get the pleasure of kind of showcasing 3 of our municipal projects. We selected these 3 specifically because they have DPW experience tied to them. The first one we want to talk about here is the Cassopolis Municipal Project. This is a recent project that we just completed within the last year. This photo here just kind of ties back to, we worked very closely with the village manager, Emily, on from programming through conceptual design, schematic design, construction documents to final move-in day, and had a lot of exposure with her and her staff members. This is a photo of the exterior of the municipal complex. So one important feature here is that they had 3 different departments. So they had the DPW offices, the village staff, and the police department all tied into this one building. They also really wanted the aesthetics of the exterior to fit in with their surrounding kind of beach town vibe that they had going. Near the back, we have the large DPW warehouse, which is about just under 12,000 square feet. Just a few interior photos here. So this is kind of their entry open office where their village staff works. Again, kind of tying that beach kind of atmosphere into the elements. Near the back, kind of specific to DPW, so they have an open office DPW station, which is where their staff kind of touches down in the morning or in the evening. They have a standard closed office for their DPW manager, and then they're able to kind of lock off that feature from the rest of the offices so that their DPW staff does have access throughout all hours to the spaces that they need in the building. This would be their meeting hall, so this was kind of their focal point. They really wanted to be showcased on what the community would see when they were first driving down the main street. And then just a couple images here of the DPW warehouse near the back. So again, it's about 12,000 square feet. We included a lot of features. So there's a wash bay, there's a lot of storage, including gated storage as well as storage on the mezzanine. Of course, there's space for a lot of their fleet of vehicles, which they have a wide variety of vehicles that they have to fit in there, as well as equipment. This is the Nottawassippi DPW. So one key element that I want to point out here is that because this was located in more of a residential area, we had to kind of be very specific on how it was laid out on the site, as well as making it kind of fit in a little bit better with residential elements. Obviously, you don't want more of a metal building structure sitting next to a home, so having those elements tie in there. And then the departments that worked out of this office were their environmental department as well as their public works department. So there was some office space tied in there for them as well. And then we have, this is actually the DPW space in that building. So you can see there's some mezzanine space with storage above as well as equipment. All the materials obviously very durable to hold up to heavy use.
Okay, see, if you notice the first DPW building when we looked at, that was a standard metal building, engineered metal building. This is a standard construction building. This has masonry walls and steel trusses for the structure.
And then the last project we just kind of want to touch on is the Bergmann Department of Public Works building. So we actually worked on this building about 35 years ago. So this was a renovation to their existing building, which throughout 35 years obviously had a lot of heavy usage and wear and tear. So it was in kind of dire need of some updates. This kind of sat in between an industrial park, a commercial area, as well as residential. So still kind of tying in all of those features into that space.
That was one of the first projects that I worked on. And it really makes you feel old when they start renovating the buildings you designed.
Well, as I said, I'm here for a couple of specific reasons. One is facility assessment, and the other one is bond issue assistance. And why are we talking about facility condition assessments? I know one of the factors that you're going to be considering is, do you consolidate everything into one municipal complex? Do you keep the buildings and do a new DPW building only? So as you're doing that, we find it's really value added to be able to provide an indication of what might be required going forward in each of those buildings. And we do that through a facility condition assessment. We use a program called VFA, almost said VFW, VFA, which has two phases. One is the field collection of information, and the other is analyzing it. It's all done on a tablet, and the assessors, the architects and engineers go out, they look at all the systems, they look at the site, all of the components, and everything is tied to two industry standards. BOMA, Building and Operation Managers Association, BOMA, which has established life cycle for all building components and site components. And it's also tied to RS means, which is an industry standard construction estimating. So you go through the building and the auditors receive their assignments on the mobile device, and they go, if we were assessing this room, for instance, we would look at the acoustic tile ceiling, and we would say, well, generally not in bad shape. A few things need to be replaced. So you'd key that in, and it would automatically generate a cost for doing that, as well as when it's estimated it needs to be replaced. So you have that for each building and site component. The information is objective, it's transparent, and it's defensible because it's tied to something industry standard databases. It's not our guess as to what it would cost. From that, you can get, and I know this is hard to read, it's really an eye test to see who can read line 3, but putting that aside, you get a listing of each building, what is required by year, so that the city and the city manager and facility people can look at that as you're doing your budgeting for each year. You can say, okay, we have to be prepared in 5 years to replace the roof. We need to be prepared to replace the heating system in 8 years. Will it fail then? It's not guaranteed, but at least you have a benchmark to plan going forward. And by the same token, you can use those figures, that data, as we did in Cassopolis. We looked at all the buildings. We said, you know, it's going to cost more to replace that building than to build new, or almost as much. And Emily and the village used that as a benchmark to do their planning moving forward. The other thing I work on is bond issue assistance. I'm not saying you're going to go for a bond, but if you do, this is something that we can provide and assist with. It really is a 3-step process. We call it citizen-led and community-driven because we encourage, not necessarily require, that a planning committee be put together, made up of people in this room, as well as interested citizens that you would identify, to really define the project as the first part, that planning, that pre-design work. Once you've decided that this is the project and the scope of the project, and if the decision is made to go for a bond issue, you move to funding, which we'll talk about in a minute, and then finally, after success, to the actual final design and construction. We've got what we call a playbook that clearly defines all the steps. You might have seen on the previous slide, if you have sharp eyes, that the process is scalable. It's not a one-size-fits-all. So these are the committees that we usually put together to promote the bond. And it's a process that begins, again, with that leadership committee. We conduct voter research on past bond issues and what the outcome was. Research into the community. What are the hot buttons? What are the likely issues that need to be addressed? A little bit of fundraising. You always need some money to get the word out. Develop a campaign theme and target that to potential yes voters. Not every voter, I'm a senior citizen, and I've got different values than a family just starting out. So you want to make sure that the message, I'm not saying you cheat and and use different messages, but you make sure that the focus is directed to the people you're trying to reach. And doing that leads to a good voter campaign and success on election day. So that's a process that we bring to the table that may or may not be needed here in Buchanan, but if it is, we can provide that service to the city.
We also have experience working with the USDA and rural development and obtaining funding for small rural towns such as Buchanan. Years ago, Buchanan was excluded from that, and I don't understand why. I heard it was something about the railroad, but we contacted the USDA and they said that they've told us that Buchanan is eligible for low-interest loans. The grants are a thing of the past, but there would be a possibility for low-interest loans. The project approach, my understanding of Buchanan changed quite a bit when this RFP came out. I had a chance to talk with Mike when I went down to the DPW. I had no idea that they provided so many functions in town. They really need a facility to support them. They do everything from maintaining the streets and the utilities to doing, taking care of putting up the flag and plants, maintaining their own vehicles. It's a very active DPW, more so than a lot of larger cities. So I learned a little bit from this exercise. Our project approach is that we're going to start out with we're going to start with a programming exercise, and it's called a Roles, Goals, and Controls Workshop. At that Roles, Goals, and Controls Workshop, we'll sit down with the stakeholders and determine who has a say, who has responsibility in getting the word out between people, just to organize a project. It's a very nice and easy way to move on the project. This project seems to have little ambiguity right now because we don't know if we're going to do just a DPW or possibly a municipal complex or possibly something in between, like a phased building. So that might all work itself out in that area or into the next phase, which is the programming phase. These are pre-design phases. During pre-design, we'd also be doing the feasibility studies that Carl talked about, and they'll kind of tell us where we're going to go forward on the rest of the project. Also in programming, we would do things like have a geotechnical report done of the site. There's several sites in the area that are likely contaminated. I've worked on a couple of them myself. That's for the phase 1 environmental audit. And I worked on several sites, and we should do a geotechnical review because a mile north of us and a mile south of us, there's gravel and sand, but if you're downtown, it's pretty much clay, I think. I know at miles it's clay and it's hard as rock. So those are things we have to know about a building before we can start constructing. After the pre-design services, we go into the schematic design phase where we take the information we learned during the programming after we sat down with you and figured out what the building's going to be, and we designed kind of a rough design of the building. It would show the spaces and the exteriors, and there'd be some renderings, and we'd bring that back to you so that you could look at that and match that against the program that we've developed and see if that's the building that you want, because we're here to design your building. After you sign off on the preliminary design services, we would slide into the design development, and this is still a design area of the project. During design development, we start picking materials. We start selecting HVAC systems, things like that. We might look at what the best equipment for the building is. We'd be bringing on the mechanical and the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing consultants. So that would get us through the design development, which would be after you signed off on design development, we'd slide into the construction document phase, and that's kind of my favorite part of the job because that's where we develop the plans that are used to permit, build, and bid on the project. And they're kind of fun. It's like putting together a big puzzle, but we would get those plans put together. We'd come back to you again, probably at about 60–70% for the first review to make sure we're still going in the right direction. And then at 100%, we'd come back to you for a sign off. And then once you sign off on the project, we would go to the bid administration phase. During bid administration, we would send the plans out for bids. We'd solicit bids from qualified contractors. We'd also send the bids out to the state of Michigan for plumbing and mechanical, plumbing and mechanical review. I believe the city handles the architectural and electrical reviews here. So the plan reviews are being taken care of while we're bidding it. The bid period usually lasts about 4 weeks. And also during bidding, we would prepare any change order or addendas that are required or changes that come about during that time period. At the end of the bid administration phase, we would have a public bid opening. We'd sit down and we'd open the bids, then we would review the bids, analyze the bids, and provide the city with a recommendation of award. Once the city awards a project, we would assist with having contracts signed, and then the project would slide into the contract administration phase. And that's where the contractors might not like me very much because they might have daily inspections just because I'll probably live within half a mile of the project. So during contract administration, we would review the contractor's pay requests. We would have probably bi-weekly progress meetings with the contractor. We would prepare change orders that may come up because anything you design will always have changes. It's just the nature of the beast. They might be initiated by the drawings, by the contractor, or by the city. And then we would follow that process through until completion of the project, where we do punch lists with the city. And after the punch lists are complete, we would collect all the documentation, such as warranty booklets, things like that, and present that to the city. After completion of the project, we would come back approximately 12 months later, 11 months later, and do a post-construction warranty inspection. In the state of Michigan, all construction is warranted for a year. So we like to come back just before that year is up and then walk through the building with the owner and with the contractor. And I don't want to say we'll pick it apart, but if there's something not working correctly, we try to get it corrected then so that you'll have a well-functioning building.
One of the key things that we feel is essential is ensuring that you get value for what you're investing in the project. And there's a lot of reasons why you might be doing this project. And we listed some of them there, and some of them may be applicable, some may not. But regardless, the overarching goal is to make sure that the project meets your needs and that you're getting value for what you're investing. Really, it comes down to balancing expectations. Projects typically have a fixed cost. You have to define the scope and the time that it's going to take to do the project so that you have a realistic expectation of what the project is all about. One of the key things we found is cost to change. When do you identify needed changes in the plan? I'd like to say we're going to develop a plan together that's going to be perfect from the start. But as we look at it, you're going to think about things, and we're going to identify things that, we could do that a little better, or maybe we need to do this. When those changes are identified is critical to controlling costs. You got those two lines there, the ability to change. Once you get into construction, it becomes harder and harder to make those changes, and it's also more costly. So you got the line going up. Too often, people wait till they're into the construction documents to make those changes. Our goal is to identify options. I know this is impossible to read, so just kind of look at the colors and the boxes. But by providing options for you and dialogue with you, you might have heard us, I know you heard us use the term listen. We don't do this in a vacuum. We very much a collaborative process, and working together, identifying through a design value matrix what are the best options to pick so that we identify any changes that are needed early on in the process when it's easier to change and much less costly to change. And that's something that we're proud of at Wightman and that we've used for years with our clients on architectural projects. Put this slide in just to talk a little bit about the life cycle cost everybody thinks, well, it's the cost of constructing the building that's the most expensive thing. But really, our experience has shown that maintenance is actually over the life of the building, is over a quarter of the cost of what you're going to invest between building and maintaining that structure. So it's really important that we identify those factors that are going to affect maintenance and control them early on through the selection of materials and processes as we design the building.
So why Wightman? We're a local firm. We are, and so is our sister company, or our ME Design, our partner. They're about as local as we can be to this project. And we are experts at municipal design. That is, the majority of our work is municipal work. So we're kind of a good fit for the city. And we also provide a lot of different services, such as planning that Carl does, or architectural work, and civil engineering, environmental. It's just a good match, and we're easy and we're accessible. We have extensive institutional knowledge with the city. We've done quite a bit of work here. We did things like the farmers market. There's quite a few projects in the city that we have done. We did the streetscape. We did the structural work for the senior centers. We've been around the area quite a bit, and we've had calls in the past from the city asking us things like, how do you shut off the water at Electrovoice when the water system, when the fire suppression system froze? And we just happen to have those drawings in our archive, which is kind of handy. So there's a couple of reasons. They were there, right? And we are also interested in the city and have a personal connection here. So we can't make a mistake, because you're going to know it. We're not leaving this area, and you're not leaving. So we have to give you the best service we possibly can. And we will be doing the inspections, kind of like I said. The contractor's probably not going to like us very much, because we're going to probably give this project all the attention it deserves, plus a little bit. And I enjoy doing that. That's a good thing. And the most important thing, we want to make sure that Buchanan remains the nicest city in America. What's next?
We really pride ourselves on becoming a trusted advisor for our clients, and maybe that's a little bit cliche and everybody says it, but to us, I think that means a little bit different. We really want to build those long-term relationships and get to know our clients. We're not here for short-term gain. We want to have benefits and relationships that help us now during construction and then well into the future. So becoming that trusted advisor is really important to us.
And finally, one of the key things is value. Chris was going to have this slide, which is why he and his friend are up there. But
I was going to have it taken out.
Yeah. We just couldn't get a good picture of me to put in there, so you got Chris to look at. But really, integral to building that trusted advisor relationship is bringing value to the project. We talked about it a little bit in the added services that we bring in terms of the facility assessment and the bond issue assistance. We bring value in that we listen. We don't dictate. We listen early in the design process. We develop options that you can evaluate to get the best solution for the price. One of the things we didn't mention, and just briefly, we use a third-party cost estimator early on in the process to identify, are we on track? Are we within budget? Architects and planners and interior designers are not always the best at knowing exactly what that's going to cost. So having an independent third-party person look at it and evaluate the design and what it's going to cost allows us, again, to make those changes early on before it ends up costing you money. And finally, during the bidding phase, having those alternates. Maybe there are things that we'd like to do that are outside the budget, but we can bid them as alternates to enable the city to still get them if the overall base bid comes in under budget. So There are several methods that we bring to add value to the project and to build that trusted relationship with you.
Also with those alternates, with the crazy construction and the atmosphere right now, it's very difficult to estimate prices. So those alternates can probably allow us to dial the project into your budget. We don't know what your budget is right now, so it's a little hard to talk about that, but there's always a budget. All firms can design a DPW building. All the firms that you can talk to, we're all qualified. They can do the work for you. But at Wightman, we'll design Buchanan's DPW. It'll be your custom building. So I'd like to thank you and we really appreciate you having us here today. I guess we can take questions if 5:30, exactly a half hour. But if you have any questions, we'd be happy to address them. Using Martin Blendell. Yes. Yes, it is. Correct. Our presentation is totally set on a design bid build format. Yes, we aren't design builders. We work with design builders at times, but this is a design bid build proposal.
Questions from the panel?
I have a question for the city. A couple times in your presentation, you mentioned that the project could be more than a DPW building, and it could be a multi-complex facility including the city. Was that part of the bid specs, or will that take the project in a different direction?
I don't believe that was formally included in the bid specs. To my knowledge, what it was when Martin moved around, I mentioned the history and the fact that some of the conversations amongst the commissioners had been to ask whether that was something that should be considered.
I think that's something that would happen in a pre-phase with any of these things, kind of approaching that project.
That would be part of the feasibility reports that Carl would work on, and we assist him on that.
Have you had other projects that started out as a DPW only and then transitioned as conversations went on into a municipal building, or was it, as you always see that as separate entities?
No, Cassopolis really was.
Okay.
They brought us in, we did the assessment of the buildings, and then from that, it moved into,
Perfect.
now, which is the best alternative for us? What should we, and we worked with them to finally come up with their need, the solution that fit them best, which was that DPW building, combining it. Casey, you really, when I got out of it, you were really involved.
Right, yeah, trying to include multiple departments into one building has some diverse needs, that's for sure. But they're not needs that we can't tackle. And working closely with the community and members like yourself, we really start to kind of focus on what is needed over something else, what's a benefit here versus a pro or con there. So we really work through all of those things early on and discover what those needs are.
Very good, thank you.
At Cassopolis, their DPW was in really, really bad condition. And that was a project that they had talked about for a while. And then they got a very progressive village manager, and she was able to find a lot of money, and we assisted her with that. And that project turned into a full municipal complex.
Maybe you have maybe you've answered this already, but do you have a proposed timeline for like feasibility and design?
We really didn't pull one together, but
Do you have a feel for one?
I think the feasibility could be done within a month.
A month, 6 weeks.
And design then,
And then we'd wait for your decision of how you want to move forward with the project. And then the design would vary quite a bit between a simple DPW. I don't want to call it simple because it's a fairly complex DPW or a DPW that's part of a municipal complex.
Okay.
It'd probably double the time to do a municipal complex. So the DPW would probably take 8 weeks, maybe. And then we go into the bidding phase there.
So roughly a month for feasibility and then roughly 2 months for
But
design.
I'd say 2 to 3 months for design, depending on the complexity of what our final program is.
Okay.
If you were to start
If
soon,
the scope changes from just DPW, do your costs that you've associated with the project also?
Yes, and that's something we negotiate that with the city.
I was just gonna say that if the timeline that Chris laid out is something that you follow, that would mean you're bidding next winter, which is the best time to
Yeah,
bid.
that was kind of what triggered my question.
I think it'd be late in the winter to be bidding, but we could probably have this ready for spring construction. There's a little curveball that's in there, and that's right now working with the state of Michigan on their plan reviews. We have some plan reviews for plumbing that are in at the state right now, and one of them went 3 months before it was responded to. So they're catching up, and they'll do whatever they can do to help us out. But that's the timeline right now for plumbing and mechanical, the 2 slowest reviews at the state right now.
Right.
Unfortunately, they're what you need here.
And you
because
can't control that.
That would be for all. anybody.
Yeah, that'd be for
Yes.
all of everybody. I was able to talk to the head of Lara, and he was able to move one of our projects up, but it was because of the school project, and if they didn't move it up in the queue a little bit, they couldn't open the school, so they were very gracious, and it was only for moving one hydrant, so they moved that ahead on us.
Thanks.
So you've looked at all the sites that we've chosen right now?
Yes.
What are the thoughts on the floodplain down at the existing?
I've constructed in floodplains in Valparaiso, and I'd estimate additional cost to build in a floodplain would probably close to $90,000. It's not a good place to build naturally, and then most likely if you set the building up to get out of the floodplain, you're going to be forced to have compensatory fill removal somewhere in that same floodplain. So you're going to either have to dig out an area of the creek around where you are, or somewhere within that area, and it might be on your property, it might be on someone else's. It'll push the timeline way back because the state of Michigan is slow, but the Army Corps is slower. I think it'll probably push the project back a year.
Well, I know that, I don't know that we ever got an updated version of the floodplain. I know we'd asked for it, but I don't think it was, I think it was all historical information.
You have that information in our office. I could get my hands on that if you,
I'd like to see that.
I can do that.
So we can either rule that place out right away and start looking at,
There was also some talk of
Railroad
putting
Street.
the facility up where the salt storage building is, because that's on a plateau and it's several feet higher, but it's not very accessible, because for the most part, you'd have to drive through the floodplain to get to it if there's a flood. I hate to say it, but your municipal people, or your DPW has to be functioning if there is a roof flood in the area. It's kind of important. So I hate to go ahead on, or talk ahead on the reports we're going to be giving you, but personally, I am not really in favor of building a floodplain. And there's definitely not enough room there for the municipal complex.
What sites did we take everybody to?
So I showed them the existing DPW building, the site up on the hill, Feed Mill, the 401 River Street.
We really do focus on earnestly important.
So you did or did not look at the female site?
I did not look at the female site. I'm familiar with it. The other site on River Street seems to be a pretty good site, because it's a large open area. The only possible issue that might occur there is you might not have enough water for a fire suppression system. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but we were working on a marijuana grow facility in that area, and it was brought up that there may not be enough water in that area, but I don't have the data for that.
When you run into a project that it's a hiccup with the contractor, what's your normal process on working through that so we don't get delays?
Well, that's a good question. That's a really good question. It matters what the hiccup is. You know, the first thing we would do is develop a solution for whatever the problem is. And then if it was the contractor's problem, we would have him do it and it would be at his cost. If it was something that was design related or a change caused by the city, we would ask for a change order amount, and then we would review the change order amount to make sure that it's legitimate, and it's correct, and then we would recommend to you whether we should accept it or not. There's other avenues if it's not accepted in the standard AIA contract. There's other avenues of how to resolve things like that, and if we had to, we'd go down one of those avenues. But for the most part, I can't say I've ever had a situation where we worked out for the discussion.
Thank you.
Ralph probably knows that better than I do too. That's a very good question, because there are hiccups and you just anticipate them and you know you have to work through them.
Oh yeah, I can't think of many commercial construction jobs that haven't. So.
I guess considering your direct relation with the city, and you know the feed mill area, and this is probably, for you guys because you're familiar with the city, what is your first impression of that area, just from a preliminary observation as you drive by to hit southbound?
My initial understanding or knowledge of the building and its site is that it would be all right for the Department of Public Works as long as there's enough area that we can have a lay down area, because there's a lot more to a DPW than just a 12 or 13,000 square foot building. You need space around the building to have extra material, and maybe have asphalt, probably have some tanks for gas, things like that, and you also just need space to work. So if there's enough space down there, I think it would be all right for a DPW with that proximity to the trains, and I've seen the trains go through there. It would not be the best place for a municipal complex. I don't know how it would affect if the police or the fire department were putting them in a municipal complex. I don't know how that would affect them in their response time. But that's something we could look into too. We did a similar report for Bergmann's fire department, and that was a big part of it, was to determine what the travel times were if the railroad stopped you from going one direction, or if there was a stop in one area, how would it best get around it. So that's something we could look at in that case, I think.
Thank you.
I think, since it keeps coming up, can you give a general percentage? If we were to build a complex with everything at once, what is the savings for the city? Rather than build a DPW and then the city hall.
Well, that's a tough question.
I know, I'm just, it keeps coming up though, so
Yeah.
I'm just gonna ask,
It's a great question. That's something I think we'd have to look at in the feasibility study, because when you get into that, you're talking about the maintenance costs of those buildings in the in-trunk time periods. And if the buildings are in rough shape, like the DPW or the fire station seems to be in kind of rough shape, you have to look at those costs for the maintenance of those buildings at the same time, plus the cost of money a year from now, 3 years from now. Right now, construction costs are just skyrocketing. I'd like to say you'd probably save. I can't even mention it.
90%, right?
No, it'd be really hard.
Yeah, half off.
It'd be a difficult one.
Are you building this?
There's just too many factors. No.
So, on River Street, you see a possible problem with water supply?
I was not there. I believe the city did a water test for the marijuana grow facility that was going to go up on that road, and it came back that there wasn't adequate water to provide the fire suppression system in that building, or it had to specially designed or tanks would have to be brought up. I don't know if that's true, that's just something that was told to me
That's interesting.
about a year ago.
Mhm.
The reason as I understand, the reason there's not that much water in that area is that I guess there used to be elevated water tanks for Clark Equipment when Clark was there, and that's what supplied the water for those big buildings that were torn down.
Mhm.
And now without those tanks there, I just don't know if there's adequate pressure for a fire suppression system, so that would be something that would have to be looked at. in
Interesting.
the portion of this job.
Interesting how that never came up. Yeah. No more? Ralph? Okay. Can't remember
Good, thank you.
Nothing?
I'm gonna look into the water.
I know, that's very interesting.
Yeah, would you let me know too? Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because, well, that's another conversation, but thank you for that, though, I
And
appreciate
there
that.
used to be standpipes and stuff up there years ago, but I don't even know if they're still in effect.
I did have a question. When you're talking about site feasibility, what is your approach? Seems that we do have some competing interests as far as different sites to compare, and also the competing interest of do we focus solely on DPW building, or do we want to bring into the conversation the possibility of fire department in other areas? How would you guys first begin that process?
I think it'd be with a discussion. We would have to interview you and see what's important to you, what's important to the city. Then we'd have to look at each site and the difficulties on each site with all of those items. You know, if the site's large enough to have the size facility required, it could be water. We look into all of those items with the site analysis.
If I could just add, we have a scoring matrix that we've used on other projects to compare.
Okay, you mentioned early on that you use that process to sort of review the condition of the building and estimate what the maintenance costs are and those sort of things. So would you recommend making that assessment for all of the city facilities that would be considered for municipal complex, and you use that as your matrix to compare the cost savings over time?
Yes.
Would that be included in your
That's
bid
in-
scope of work, or would that be additional cost to you?
No, that's included.
It's an interesting program because schools use it. It's really strong for people that have a campus because it's for ongoing buildings, so you can keep looking forward on what you're gonna need to put into the buildings. Even if you don't do this project or whatever happens, it would probably be a good exercise for the city to start doing that. Then you can plan for your future budgets.
Yeah, I think that aspect, especially regardless of where we go with it, makes sense to for all of our city buildings and energy. That's really best practice. That's great to know that you guys.
And we would include the new building in there, so you have a database for everything, because that's real easy. We would know exactly the quantities and when it was built.
I don't wanna pat on Carl's back, but he's doing
Go ahead,
how
you
many?
can.
85
Well-
schools for the Detroit school system.
Casey and I are working on a project with others. We looked at 15, and now we're talking, this school district wants us to look at the other 85 buildings.
So we have an army of people going out to look at those. Office is kinda empty when they're gone.
Means you're making money, right?
It does, it's a little lonely for the rest of us, so.
Just one more, I'm just curious on as far as being creative in situations such as ours, where we have a limited amount of city space, most of it's residential, and you know, the feed mill, maybe, but some issues, some concerns. River Street, obviously some water concerns, space doesn't seem to be an issue. Current location, floodplain issue, up at the salt barn, space constraints, difficult to get to. I guess in your experience, what have you seen that's similar or in the same scope of work for different sites such as this, or city limitations based on space? How have you guys handled that? And
Well, I did this for the Baroda project, and we had, I think we had 4 sites we looked at. And each site was unique and had its own problems. The downtown site had an issue with getting to it was totally with response times, and because it was on, at the time, it was a dead end downtown.
Is that where they have that new street?
Yeah,
Right.
they added the street since, but that's the building, was one of the locations. The other one's on the far east part of the town, but there's a gas line that ran right through the property, which reduced, it was a big gas line, so that reduced the area that was buildable. Plus, again, for a fire department, it's probably not good to be sitting next to a gas line that could explode. So we went through that one, and then the site that seemed to be the best had a real high water level, so we were around groundwater level. We had blueberries on it, which usually indicates the clay there is holding the water up. But that ended up, in my opinion, being the best location because of the price of the property, and we could bring enough fill in to make it work. So we look at ways of making these sites work in the most economical way or the best way for the city. And that's probably what we'd have to do with the sites you're looking at, because, you know, there's gonna be costs, potential costs for, say, environmental remediation. That can get really pricey.
Right.
If you happen, I worked on other sites where we were on the edge of, basically an industrial park. And we took soil borings, and we had basically chalk for 10 feet. Everybody in the neighborhood was dumping their garbage from their sites there, and then they covered over with topsoil and made it look like a good site. So those are the things we try to glean some information on. We ended up having to take all the material out, and we didn't have a real happy client, but he knew he had to do it, so. The report was well worth the cost.
Thank you very much.
When you mentioned earlier about the track using the feed mill site, what would be minimum distance from the track that you would be recommending?
I'm not aware of what that is. We'd have to talk to Amtrak and find out how wide their right-of-way is.
I just meant for the, the vibrations and stuff in the buildings and stuff like that.
That'll be matched with the soil, because if you're in real soft soil, that vibration will go for miles. If you're in a more sandy soil, I think it would dissipate probably, if you're, I'd want to be 100 feet away, I would say.
It's quite better than what I thought.
You're gonna still hear that train going by.
Yeah.
They fly through there at times. So, I've worked on, in Dowagiac, we tore down the big gray building. I don't know if you're familiar with that, they call it Big Gray, but that was right on the train.
Track.
And
Went
we had
through it.
to get permission
Yeah.
to work on the edge, and we had to have an emergency plan in case, like, part of the building fell over onto the track, things like that. So that's something that might have to do if you build in that location. There'll probably be additional safeguards that we have to take to make sure the track is always open and safe.
Very good. Well, if there's no other questions.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot for your time.
Yeah. You guys have a good evening.
We really look forward to working on this project.
Bergmann.
Thank you.
I'm going to let you guys take the floor. We've kind of done all the niceties previously, so
Sure.
however you guys want to present, please do, and
All right.
we'll go from there.
I will start us off. So we are Bergmann, and we're extremely excited to be here. And when we get through the presentation stuff, there's some other components to Buchanan for me personally that I want to share with you. So I'm kind of excited about that piece of it. So that's going to be key. Our presentation today will give you a little bit more idea about who we are. I know who you guys are, but we want to share a little bit more about who Bergmann is and our team. We'll also go through our process for our test fit and site analysis and study, so you understand that. We'll also share a little bit more about how we do programming, because there's a couple components to your project, so we'll kind of walk through that, and then once we get through that, we'll open up for some questions. But again, a conversation, so if you have any questions for us at all, we did go through the niceties, but please just kind of jump in. We're human just like everybody else. So my name is Buddy Heiler, and I'm the principal over at our Grand Rapids office for Bergmann. And what I'd like to do is share a little bit of background about our team and who Bergmann is. We are a national company. We are part of 3 different regions. Our team here is part of the Midwest region, and we love to be able to talk about that single point of contact wherever it's coming from, because the tagline says national firm, strong local presence. We bring some of that national expertise when we need to any of those local communities that we have. So that's kind of key. You can see on here, we've been in business for over 41 years, and a lot of repeat. We have 450 plus. That's probably up to 475 at this point. 15 different offices, registered in 47 different states. And I say that because we're registered in those states, we work in those states, we work with DPWs and municipalities, and so we have this opportunity to bring some of that experience. And we all know sometimes that experience, different municipalities have different concerns and issues, and then we can bring that to the table when we're working with the city of Buchanan or whoever that might be. So we're pretty excited about being able to offer that coming from a large group. Our team, we are, as a group, we're full service. Our team out of Grand Rapids as well is a full service team. So we have, we cover the whole spectrum internally. We also work under 2 platforms. We have a buildings platform group, and we have an infrastructure. Buildings cover everything from the ground to utilities, storm and water, and then we move into foundations. That's all site civil, and then we move into foundations for the structural design, and we work in through the MEP. So everything is covered in-house on our team. There's a lot of advantages to that, and I'm sure there's some questions about our presentation and maybe our proposal, and I think I can kind of respond to some of that maybe later. So I think that'll be really helpful. So if there are any questions, please just let me know. So with that, again, I introduced myself. I am an architect. I've moved my way up, and I've had fun doing what I do, and we've had an opportunity to bring on some really strong staff, and I feel we can pretty much do anything that we want to do because we've got really good people. So I brought along 2 of those key people today, and again, I'm that main point of contact as we move forward, and it's always essential that information flows through an individual. Not to say that you have to have ultimately control, but you do want to be aware of everything that's going on. So then you can filter that information to your team and then come back, because we all know you start off in early discussions. We take meeting minutes and stuff like that, but in the end, I mean, somebody has to be accountable for those discussions that happen. So that comes through a single point of contact. With that, I'll have Brian Butkus here introduce himself.
Good evening. My name is Brian Butkus. I'm a project manager at Bergmann, as well as an architect, project architect, and that is my job as project manager, is being that front man, that one point resource.
Hi, everybody. Lewis Hill, mechanical engineer. My discipline that I've worked in. Currently the manager of our engineering team that we have in the Midwest region. We have electrical, structural, civil engineering, full service engineering staff.
So, on the front end, the people that you see today are the people that are managing the job and doing the work as well. So we're just not coming here as a business development team or maybe the A team for a presentation. That's not the case. We're actually doing the work, and we're the people that you're going to be dealing with day in and day out. So that's really important. I think that's going to be key. As Lou heads up the mechanical side, and Brian and I worked for years together, and that's always key, that we work closely together. Brian lives and based in the same community I do, and so we kind of play off of that. So I mean, that's ideal for our group. What I'd like to do is turn it over to Brian a little bit on the design side to give you a little sense of what we look at when we look at building design and site selection and system design. We'll give a little excerpt on that, and then we'll flow into some of the programming pieces.
So the first item that's on the list, you'll see, is visioning. And that item is more specific to, you've heard of visioning sessions. So the visioning session is just that. It's just to see what do you have in mind for the facility. Not only what you have in mind, but what are the uses going to be, what are the needs of that facility. So from that, you look at certain processes within that. These are all high level, looking at from vision, construction budget, and funding source. They're all high level, looking at more of the main purpose of that facility. So we're also looking at the physical attributes when it comes to that visioning. And those attributes could be anything from the longevity, the maintenance of the facility. We're also looking at whether you want that facility to be green, LEED, even net zero for that matter. Those are very specific, those are very important items to know up front. They'll affect the decisions as they go through that whole process. And then last but not least is really the appearance. It's obviously something that you want people to know that where their funding went, it was worth it, something that will hold up, something that will give that, depending on the location of that facility, is really an important factor to how that building is perceived from that curb appeal standpoint or appearance. So the second item we've got is as far as site selection criteria, and then calling out zoning and land use compatibility. And specifically, the zoning is very important to know what the city has that area zoned as, and looking at that compatibility, meaning the use of that facility is accommodating that zoning. That also has a lot to do with scheduling, because if you have to go for a variance or certain other board or commission approval, you have to do that as well. So, and then looking at access and visibility from the road, visibility to know point of entry, access onto the site, access around the site, that type of thing. So utilities and environmental consideration, looking at how those utilities front that facility, what's the quickest way to get into that from the, the water main standpoint, from the power, gas, all those types of services that building is going to need to access. So looking at the final item that we've got there is the programming discussion. So now we're looking at more closer or more definitive information in which we're looking at vehicle storage and maintenance. What's the count? What do you want to store within that building? How many vehicles, what those vehicle sizes are? Will you be maintaining them? Will they go out to be maintained? Are they on a certain service schedule? How are they scheduled or serviced? Do you need a service trench? Do you just need lifts? There's many variables to look at, as well as the operations. So there's that process of if it is being serviced, where is it pulling up? What has to be done? What has to be stored? If you're going out, you have to onto a job site. You have to pack up what you have. Is there something that needs to be fabricated? There's a lot of variables that you have to consider. So then looking at the future expansion as well, it matters how those spaces are adjacent to each other to allow for that expansion. And so, like I said, there's many different design considerations that we want to look at up front. And most importantly, we would like you to speak
Sure,
on,
sure.
specifically on mechanical systems.
Yeah, I can go back to site selection sort of too. Something Brian did bring up is the services that are in those areas. Whether we're going to do a septic system or whether we're going to do a lift type station, that has a big factor in how the buildings can operate and the maintenance requirements and the cost of that site. A lot of former buildings that we worked on, the sewer was a big driver on that site selection, is how we're going to get the sewage back to either some type of city system or a septic system. So then going into the building systems, the mechanical and the electrical, we find early integration into those systems into the concept of the design is really where we can make those really good decisions about what kind of mechanical system you're going to use, what kind of electrical system you're going to use. That way you've got a building that's holistic and it's not just the architectural, the structural, or the function of it, but it's actually the systems that are integrated in with those concepts. So you're making a whole decision about how the building is being operated and how it's being functioning. And then lead practice is another area that we get into. We'll help you with determining whether a certain concept fits your lead goals, if you have lead goals. If you don't, that's fine. But we've ingrained a lot of those practices in our normal process.
The one thing I would add, and we didn't stress, and that becomes my job too, is when we're looking at building design and programming, site selection, budget's critical. We want to make sure that we design within a budget. So that is key. That's my job. That's communication. You want to make sure you get the systems that you want inside the building, or you have the alternates to be able to set yourself up for pricing or maybe future expansion for the facility. So, but budget's going to be key, and circulation and programming and function. Early on, as a young architect, I had opportunities to do cool buildings, and I just wanted to design. It was really cool. But there was a point in time that I would look and say, well, I'd do something different on that. But then you realize, well, wait a minute, don't be so critical. There's a reason why, what we're doing. And so the best thing is to make sure that we have function. Things function well, circulation, the environment, adjacencies, everything works. The architecture, it happens. Whether or not it's a DPW building or it's a courthouse or whatever it might be. And when you do good design, the architecture comes easy. But you got to get the relationships, and you got to make sure that we come in budget, because if we're over budget, nobody's happy and you can't get what you want. So that's my job, to make sure that we stay on track and make sure that we design within a budget. I'm going to swipe, Brian, and have Brian talk a little bit about, he talked a little bit about the programming, but what does that look like graphically when we get in front of you? And Brian's going to kind of walk through that a little bit with you.
For the reach there. So programming is looking at this is just one tool that we use as far as knowing what's got to go into the building. So programming is really looking at relationships, looking at the spaces available as well as square footages. If it was a little larger, you could see that this first column here is actually the spaces that are those needs, those uses. Those are assigned quantity, meaning if there's so many restrooms or toilet rooms or showers or what have you, those get assigned a quantity as well as a square footage. And from that, that is, and then there's remarks that if there's some specifics that are defined. So this really gives just an outline, a real program outline. And so from that stage, looking at space relationships, it's easiest to take those square footages that you see within these columns here and give a graphical representation. And here we'll see some larger spaces, whether that's a large apparatus bay or garage of sorts, and maybe there's a certain shop size that you can see. But what that does is it gives you an idea as far as relationships for how those spaces are to be developed or can interconnect or link. And so here we see different color coding, which defines the different types of spaces, whether it's more for administration, more for maintenance of it. And then from that stage, it's the idea that we take it and start reorganizing those spaces so that there's a flow that goes through that, from maybe there's a certain procession or entryway, what has to be adjacent to that from a public standpoint, is there a certain definitive line between the more of a public and private standpoint, and will there be any point of those two interacting? So that really becomes a block diagram, what we consider, and then this is more of a more refined or more, I guess I don't want to say refined, it's more of a sketch to start seeing how all these different relationships here can be assembled in one large mass, or one large footprint. And here we can start seeing nodes that start defining entryway, and then we start seeing some idea of access as well as different types of uses, how those can be intermingled in that space. So that's really from that, like I said, this is just one tool or one way of taking the information and starting to develop, which you can see through that outline here, you can start seeing a building or a form develop from that.
So when we talk about programming, you can't ignore the fact that we want to get the program and get it sized right and get the priorities. What's a need and what's a requirement or request for it. So we get the sizing correct. When we do that, all the rest of that programming piece, the building itself has to work within itself and the flow, but then it also has to work with our site. I mean, that is critical, and that's obviously the first phase of what we're taking a look at. So that's got to be really key. And so we understand, we're looking at 2 opportunities for 2 sites on here. And so looking at, when we do an analysis, we also look at those sites and the proximity, the traffic, the outreach, how you're going to service and leave those spaces, how you might come through the community. So I think there's probably a lot more discussions about those particular sites and what they need to begin, and for the DPW and the uses for that site and some of those utilities that might be on the site. So that was kind of an overall there, but when we start to dial in on your existing site, I was here and we did the walkthrough and it happened to be raining out that day.
Yeah.
So I did not have my steel-toed shoes on, so I got a little wet. But I also got wet inside the building too. So it was there. I could see sky coming outside the building, and so it was interesting. Doesn't mean that we can't fix things, but fixing things costs money too. So we have to weigh and balance that out. I love rehab projects, but your existing facility is here, and then you obviously have the salt barn that's elevated up on that site there, and so the building itself, it looks like the programming and the discussions we have, some of the programming pieces, they work for you, but maybe how they're put together and how they fit on the site, there has to be some additional consideration to that. So I think here, as we look at looking at both of these sites, it'll be very interesting. And with that, when we do look at a site, there are some components, and I'm going to have Brian walk through these, but these are major factors when we look at the building. Obviously, we want to put a building on the site, but there's sometimes a cost, there's some restrictions, and this is where we do a deep dive into that site. And this is why we have Site Civil on board on our team, so they can do some of this early investigation, so we don't get caught on something.
So looking at zoning, I mentioned it before, zoning is very critical in that sense that we have to make sure that both the ordinance, the zoning map, as well as the use of the facility all coincide, so that if not, then that brings another set of questions or other things that have to go for approval, which affect schedule and decisions. So we're also looking at, we have second item, we've got setbacks, and looking at the different areas, those are defined by the ordinance, those setbacks, whether front yard, side yard, backyard. Those also start defining where that building area could be. It could be that there's a 25-yard front yard setback, so you end up finding out defining where that front yard is, defining where that setback is. There's maybe certain things that can go within that setback, parking, but then your building starts at a certain point and then can't go into that area without getting variance. So those that's just one example of site restrictions. One thing that we did find with this particular site, you can see here that there's a blue pathway there. And this is a map that we found that delineates that floodplain area that would go through the site, and which seems to reason why there's that contouring of such. So it doesn't mean that this mean that you just don't say, I can't build there. There's certain things that can be done in order to make it buildable, certain things that can be built within a floodplain area. The question more is that it becomes one, as Buddy mentions, more budgetary to what that cost would be. So you can do certain things may implement that. There are ways about it, but obviously you just have to start weighing that to the cost in order to implement that, as well as wetlands. And so as soon as something is surveyed, wetlands can be defined. If there's a floodplain, maybe there is some sort of plantings that will define that wetlands area. That also brings a little bit of complications. It doesn't mean you can't build. It just means there's ways around it that take time, whether you're going to get an approval to have that wetlands relocated. Usually it's a 2-to-1 ratio of where that can be. It's got to remain on site. Once again, that's a cost standpoint or a cost item that we have to consider. So environmental, part 1 and part 2. I'm looking at that environmental phase 1 would be an overall environmental study, seeing if there's any other flags, any other items that should be considered within that site. There could be anything from certain soils that aren't desirable. There could be certain things that are found, certain history upon what was built before. Maybe there's foundations there already from a previous building. So that's an important element as well. Title information as well as Alta survey. Those go hand in hand as far as how that area is defined. Title also defines if there's any easements that go through there. That also starts bringing that extension down on what that buildable area is. And so there's ways around it. But then once again, there's those certain steps that have to take into play in order to make that work out. And there's also cost variables that are affected. And then looking at a geotech report and soils report, that's really most important for structural and figuring out what those bearing capacities are, what maybe the soils are such that they can't handle a certain bearing capacity. Obviously, if there's lifts, there's going to be a certain weight on those lifts. That weight has got to be distributed underneath with a certain foundation size, and therefore that ground has got to be able to support that. And so that study is critical, especially when it starts looking at water table and whether things have to be watered. There's just a whole slew of items that engineering-wise is very important when it comes to that geotech report. And similar aspect, I'm not going to go through all the same items that we were looking at before, but just to kind of hit on some of the zoning as well as setback and height restrictions of each use group. You look at that first site, and it's really an R1, R2, or R1A, R1B type of use group that area is within, but then it is also zoned park. So that has those have side yard setbacks of a certain dimension, front yard setback, as well as a height. I think the height restriction at that point is maybe it's 20 feet, maybe it's 35 feet. So we got to look into the zoning ordinance of what that is. This particular site, being more light industrial, allows a 35-foot building height. So you're looking more towards something that's more adequate to what a DPW building can be, whether that, as far as lift heights, garage clearances, whether there's mezzanines in there. So all that has to be considered. This particular site, one concern that was found out is that there are some soils that are not desirable. And we did find a restricted covenant of that site. It's dated or stamped back in 2006. Not sure if that's been remediated yet or if that's been taken care of. But that's an additional variable that's got to be handled or looked at for part of that site selection.
I'm guessing that's not anything on the site floodplain, and this one with the environmental that you guys are not aware of. I'm assuming you probably are. We didn't get into all the details of that, but obviously when we do those researches, we have to pay attention to that stuff. And there's some potential costs for how we develop that site.
And the phase one will also, or the, excuse me, the ESA study, phase one would also bring that to light, what they find. Our site engineer is a real crackerjack as far as looking up that information. He does that very often, I mean, almost on a daily basis, so he knows where to go, where to look up from site to site standpoint to get that information. So, which he also found the floodplain information.
So that's just a little snippet on the site pieces. Obviously, we get into a lot more detail with that. As we move forward, DPW buildings aren't new to us. We have several, hopefully you read the proposal. If not, maybe go back and see some of that. There's a lot of good information in there. I've combed over it. I've been involved in a lot of those projects. So there's some good information about who we are and what we do. We currently have a couple projects that are very similar to what you're looking to do, and as we look at scope and stuff, we're working with the city of Grand Rapids right now on a 201 market relocation. They're taking all of their parks and recs and city and fleet and refuse and all of that and moving that to a new site downriver. And then Kent County is moving off that site to a new facility. So we're doing a big study for them to analyze all of their departments and then how they function and the pros and cons, and then putting them on the existing current site that they have now. And they have an existing admin building that sits here. There's about a 40,000 square foot renovation to get a lot of their programming into that space. And this is one of the final schematic plans for them to put a budget together. And this one is coming in at about $38 million. But the idea here is all of this color here is all existing that we're able to reuse. We're doing some renovations inside, but we're also then able to expand some of the vehicle storage that's in there. So we have about 270,000 square feet of new vehicle storage that's going on that site. At the same point in time, we have a new fleet facility at about 70,000 square feet. And you can imagine all the, when you get the detail, you can zoom up and you can see some of the programming pieces that are in there. But everything that you're looking for, and just multiply that, because all those components are on this site. There's also refuse that's on here. There's fueling tank. There's a lot of consideration when we went through the site for site and circulation. How we access that, how access comes off the main area, how the truck flow comes into the space and comes through and moves back out, how those trucks are serviced and set up from the beginning, from the morning, and how you enter those vehicles, and how you leave that, and then how you come back in and how you receive your salt. So there's a huge planning process of how we look at that. Circulation, making sure we have the right space for those vehicles, and maintenance. Those, again, that's the planning piece. We can get to the architecture later, but this is a good example of that. We also do an analysis and overlay. You can blow that up. That overlay really shows the intent of program of what would happen on this site if we were one story. We're actually looking at a few multiple stories and then vehicle storage and parking. So there is a little variance that when we show the client that your site really doesn't fit all the program. So we're looking at different options. We also, on this particular project, we get into obviously the pricing and do work with budgeting. We do that in-house. This particular project was with a construction partner of ours that we've worked with, and so that's been kind of a key relationship when we do that type of work. So the idea of bringing on a construction partner early, I think, is really key. Being able to have someone listen into the early decision-making that's happening, so when we get into the pricing, they understand what's there. And so, because that early piece is schematic, and it shows you the intent, but that's only 10 to 15% of the total project. So there's another 80, 85% that we're not showing drawings of. And so we have to be good interpretations of the design and construction, what's being built, and that CM needs to be involved with that, because we're making those decisions. Another project here is an MDOT project. Again, we're doing we have three sites for them. They have a fleet storage building at about 56,000 square feet, and then they have some cold storage and salt barns that are on that site. And then we've actually, in utilizing that program, We have 3 different sites, 3 different parts and pieces that are going on those buildings. So we've analyzed each one of those sites. They range from about 8.5 to 32 acres on those sites. So the unique thing about some of those sites is we do have to work with lifts. We have to bring in, because of the elevations and the grades, we have to bring in new utilities on some of those projects, which is kind of key. We run into a little bit of environmental, so that's something key on that.
So one of the challenges we had with that MDOT project is that MDOT hasn't built a facility like that in over 30 years. So none of their staff really knew what exactly they needed to build that facility. So the programming, the talking with them, getting the details of what, when you say you want a maintenance bay, what do you want in that bay? You know, and then we found out the vehicles they want to put in there are huge snow removal vehicles. So finding those details helped us lay out the maintenance facility to exactly what they need.
So my last slide is why Bergmann, because we're committed. We will be committed. We got a single point of contact. We're very excited about being in the community, and that's a key factor. There's also a passion for our team because we do a lot of this work. I mentioned early on I had a personal passion. As a green young architect, I was gung-ho. I was one of the main designers for the high school with some renovations early on in my career, and I had my ear and nose drug over every detail that I worked on. And to this day, I remember working on that on the high school, and that's been really key to me. I met my wife through that whole process. I lived in a hotel out of Niles. I worked for the construction manager that I worked on that project. I lived on site for about 1.5 years. So as a green architect, I learned a lot through that whole process. And so every time Buchanan comes up, I always think of that, and I think of bringing my wife down here, and that's just, it's just a part of you. And so when the opportunity came up with, and I heard that you guys were doing something, I really wanted to have an opportunity to come back and work for the community. So, and bring the experience of my team here. So that's my personal passion, and that's what I truly wanted to share with you, and hopefully we can be a trusted partner, and this is certainly a project that we would want to work on with you. So with that, if you have, and I'm sure you do, have any questions, I can start off, or I can field them back to Brian or Lucas. So.
I think one thing, maybe just explain your in-house versus your construction partner.
Sure. So we do our in-house. So we do everything in-house. We also have a company built from Bergmann, DPW Building. They the Bergmann team. And they actually we hold contracts, and we do construction when it's being asked of us through a client. So we can do all that pre-construction work. We also have a history of about 35 years with our principal of that company that works daily with us when we have historical data on estimating, just like a CM would do. Sometimes, though, we like to bring in construction partners, obviously, because they also have a different look on things. And so when there are smaller projects, we have some sole projects that we run through that company. But when I do early on estimating and stuff, I go to our internal team for estimating, and we'll do that. If we need double checks, we work with our CM partners very closely on that to make sure, because when we're off on budget, nobody's happy. So.
And let me add to that, right now with the supply chain problems, construction costs right now, having those good CM partners is critical to know when to slow down and wait 6 months to go build, or hurry up and let's get it bid right now and build.
Because they're connected to all those trade contractors. They have the relationships with them. We do too, but they work on multiple projects, and it's just a different insight. So having those relationships and that pulse, we have a lot of projects that are going on, and you have to have that pulse. You know, the pricing right now, we see a slight decline, but we probably know that those numbers aren't going to go completely down and back to normal. They just probably never will. Historical data says that, just like in 2005 and 2008, it's not going to get back down there. So we have to make sure we budget for it. We have contingencies. We do our due diligence on the site and understand that, because we don't want any aha moments, because that just halts the project. hopefully that answers your question.
We do mention Granger in your proposal.
Yes.
And you guys haven't really touched on that.
So Granger, we've worked on, so 201 Market. 201 Market, we are a partner with Granger. We brought them in just like that. What they help with the front end on budgeting, but we also, they have an in-house process which really speeds up the design process. It gets to that budgeting piece a lot quicker. So it's an envisioning process that we'll do some design charrettes. And then we work through those design charrettes, we go back with Granger, we talk about all the systems, we get into the finite detail with them, and then they work on that finite budgeting and historical data piece. And that adds a lot of value. It always adds value to a project like that, and they're a great partner. We've done it with others. But in this market, having somebody come on board early on, whether it's Granger, we would love to have them be on board. They're a great partner with us. But have someone on board early on, even in the design phase. Now, on 201 Market, they may not be on that next phase, but it gave them an opportunity and an owner to get a chance to see who they are and how they operate. And so it didn't exclude them from actually bidding on the CM side. So they became a partner in a relationship, and they're a great partner for us. So that envisioning process really just, it adds a whole nother level, especially with when you talk about the trades and the pricing that's coming out nowadays, just to have that historical data, because they have a lot of work that's coming through their lines. And obviously, we're really good at what we do, and the GCs are really good, and CMs are what they do. So, not afraid of that at all.
Is that basically a pre-construction from?
Yeah, they're going to help. So with that, they will help with looking at phasing. They'll look at early pre-construction cost and pricing. They'll do a complete spreadsheet with owner costs, contingencies, soft costs. We'll start to itemize all that out and then look at that phasing in that cost and projections. So they'll do a complete spreadsheet as detailed as we can get at that level. So we go behind closed doors and we talk about all the details that maybe we didn't talk here, but we know they're components that are going to go inside that building. And so we'll have a benchmark so we can have, in lieu of just doing a cost per square foot, and we can do that and have a pulse, but especially in today's market, you really want to talk about all of the disciplines and systems and utilities and a lot of things that Ryan talked about. Those are critical because they all cost money.
So I think one of the biggest questions as we review the proposal is the difference in the
I never thought you guys would ask. So even for us, when a fee comes in and we're doing consultant fees and contractors, and we look at fees that come in, and we look at that, and a lot of times, usually there's a mid-pack that's in there, and there's a guy that's really high, and I told him, there's a guy really low, and they're like, oh, we're gonna push him out because you probably missed something. So typically that's the way it is. And so I was here, I heard the bids read off, I put the fees together, and I talked to everything. I know where my numbers are. I feel good with the numbers. So I did go back and look at that. So what you have is, you've got some good teams. You had a good pack of teams. You had a selection. All the firms can do the work. It's who you want to work with, and we all have a little bit different capabilities. I was passionate enough. I wanted this job. I looked at what we needed to do, and not being slighted on quality or anything of that sort. But you do have to look at, when you look at the comparison of, so for instance, you have site selection for the first phase, but then you also have design services. So you got two different phases in there. And within the 6 firms, one firm kind of gave away that front end site analysis piece. They said, we're going to give you no charge for that. It's an idea for them to say, I'm going to give you really good value here, but on the next phase, that number was quite high. So I would challenge you to look at the other fees that came in that we're going to be interviewing with. But if you look at that, some firms looked at a very competitive price on the site selection, and then their number for the design services were higher. Other firms put a little more dollars into the site selection and then gave you a decent value on the CDs. Well, if you look at our competitors and you take those those low numbers, those competitive numbers, and comparing to ours, we're only $7,000 difference. If you look at those low numbers against our site and then our building, they're only $7,000 difference on that. And we know how to put these buildings together. So I felt really good with the numbers that I'm at and where we're at. I heard the bids read off, and once I looked at those, and I already knew where the numbers were, so I felt pretty confident with that. So there's not a huge spread when you actually look at that. So take a look at that. And that's how I looked at it. I gave you value on both of those. So I can't explain that anymore unless, I don't know. So when I do that as well, it's just not percentage. We have historical data, we all do that. We also look at percentage of the cost and how much the project's gonna be, and that's great. But when I do that, I use that to balance my fee, but then I go back in and look at man hours. I look at the team and I look at the man hours, I look at what our capabilities are, and that's where that fee comes out. And then I also look at that and say, hey, if we do a really good job on our schematic design on our test bits, which we should, because that's what we're getting paid to do, we want to utilize that information when we move into the project. And so that's the intent, that we're going to do that job, the right job on the front end. So we're not just, we're just not shuffling that side. We're going to use that information on the next page.
So if I could,
Yes.
you got your study phase,
Yep.
and so design phase of $56,000.
Yep.
And design phase, two construction documents.
Yep.
Construction
Yep.
administration. So we're getting the entire.
So you got your analysis at 9, 10, whatever that was. Then you got the design fee. Once we figure out what the building is, the design fee was at 56. If I recall, I had an allowance in there for some site civil, depending on what we're doing. The early analysis stuff, we'll do investigations on the front end. We didn't expect that we would have any of the site civil information, all of that. But we're going to do as much due diligence as we can. So that's the design and construction. Our team works on, I would imagine everybody else does, but we work on a platform called Revit, so it's all 3D modeling. So when we get done with the modeling, everything is built on a 3D platform. So it's in real time. So we can see what's going on, and it quantifies things too when we work with our contractors. They're able to use that 3D model and do pricing off of that. And so that's just kind of normal. It should be pretty standard for most of the firms nowadays, but there's a lot of technology involved in that, and a lot of efficiencies. I figured you asked about me. But
You've looked at both of our site selections. Is there any kind of a recommendation you would give for one over the other, or just exactly what?
A good question. I don't know enough to answer that, because we still have to go through the building and the programming and what needs to happen there. What I can tell you is that there are challenges on both sites depending on what we want to do. And Brian talked about setbacks and restrictions and stuff. Once we understand what the program is and how many vehicles and circulation, and the idea too that there was some discussion, it's off the table, I would suggest that we have a conversation about it, master plan. So we never look at a building to say what it is today, but what could it be in the future? But also, what could that site be in the future? Will it allow other functions on that site? And we really need to take a look at that. Whether or not you do it or not, my plan is I'm working for you, so if somebody asks you, did you ever think of this or that? You have an answer and say, yeah, we did, but then we push that aside, or absolutely, we looked at that, and this is why we head in this direction. You never want to go back to the community and somebody asks you a question and say, well, that's a good question, but I wish somebody would have asked that question about months ago. So I can't really answer it. I know one is in a floodplain. There is some cost to being with that. I think there's, because of the grades, there's some restrictions for that site, and maybe how you circulate around that building and stuff. So we're going to have to elevate the building, and some circulation. A lot of, you are coming through a neighborhood, so that there's some challenges there. But obviously there's some property and opportunity. I don't know where we're looking to build, but that grade is a little concerning because you got to access that in the flow. The other site, flat site, it does have, as Brian brought up, some concerned, and our site civil guy, not knowing everything that's going on, he's like, I said, well, what do you think? I asked him, because I knew he wouldn't give me an answer by asking anyways. I said, I'm going to the interview. I said, what, would you want to build on this? And I'm like, I, as an architect, am a little concerned about the floodplain. I'm like, I was out there. There was water. I saw the building. He says, to be honest with you, he says, right now, I have more of a concern on the other side, because I don't know about the remediation and what's on that side, what's in front of the side. He says, I want to investigate that more. He says, I know we can solve the other one. It's time and money to solve the other one, depending on where we're at in budget. For the other site, for what we've seen, we definitely want to look into that a little bit more and see what value that site will bring to you. So, yeah, like typical architect, I didn't answer your question.
Well, they call those
Thank you.
politicians sometimes too.
Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, over here.
I think I ran over my
Looking
time.
at this again today, something jumped out at me. And
Yeah.
the desire for the city of Buchanan, DPW, for a new or a renovated facility.
Yep.
What were your thoughts on that?
Well, that was kind of some of the discussions when we walked the site, and there was some discussion about, well, if we did expand that building, where would we go, and how would that? You would have to work with the existing building. Just walking the site, there's a lot of tender love and care that needs to happen to that facility. Outside of just so that's a lot of structural components and roof and steel, and there's a lot of things happening there. I don't know how well that building, programming wise, services what you need. My guess is you're making it work, and we can create magic and pull down walls and change steel and stuff, but we got to make sure that it works well, because you're spending good money. So if we're going to renovate something, we need to look really hard at what we're going to do with that, and what kind of money we're going to spend, because these buildings are there for 50, 75 years. And so we want to make sure that we actually build in the right location and in the right way. So my first impression is it seems like you're making the best of what the facility you has to offer. But like I said, there was water and skylights, and there were some interesting things going on. And I think Mike was keeping things going. He was talking and moving away from the water drips and stuff. But, so I think you would have to look long and hard if you're going to add on to that facility.
I was thinking more of making it through the next winter. Ralph and I were just talking about that, and why we build the new one. Or, if we're going to a different site.
Yeah.
Making the one we have work for another
You know,
year.
we do, and you probably have, we do a lot of building analysis, because again, that just all comes from when it in-house. That's something we can do. I think you said you had a report, some structural report on that? Yeah. So that could be something real quick when our team comes through. I mean, we can give a gut check right away. I mean, I have my first opinion, but we didn't really get into all that. So I didn't see too much of it, and I don't know what all the issues are that you're having with the facility. There was some real concern with some areas, especially when you know about them. When you don't know about them, you kind of turn a blind eye and see how far you can get. But when you know about them, then you're held responsible for them. Those are the things that would concern me. Maybe you have to spend a little money to keep things moving.
So if you're working with a firm, a construction firm that you're not familiar with, hit a roadblock, hiccup in the project, talk to me about how you get through that phase and keep the project moving along.
Well, a lot of beer. I'm joking, but I'm not joking. We like to build a really strong relationship, and usually we start off. It's got to be a partnership. When we do have a hiccup, that hiccup never comes to the client first. That is always worked out internally. We come with solutions to you guys. We don't come with, we got all these issues. What do you want to do with it? Now we're just pointing fingers. We have to be on the same page. So I confront that right away, and usually the team we're working with, I mean, that's just how you have to do it, because otherwise things build up, and we don't need that. So we come with solutions. So my idea when we come with a hiccup, I let you know that we're aware of it, and we go back and we bring that up to our team, and we come back with recommendations and solutions of how to fix it, what the budgeting is, what the phasing is, if it's added cost, how are we going to look at value engineering in certain areas, and what the next phasing and planning is. So that's key. All projects have it. You got to have a good team that works together, and good leadership that wants to work together. We do a lot of design build work, so we partner a lot with construction firms, and we understand that. Like I said, I understand what they do. I've been out on the field, and so I mean, that's our lifeline. We design the buildings, but we don't build it. So we have to have good drawings. We have to have good communication with the trade contractors out there, because they're physically building it. And if they like our team and the city, then things are going to come together. If I'm forcing somebody to do something because it's on the drawings, and it may not be the right way because it's in the field and there's other conditions, then there's got to be a little give and take on some of that. It's just not the arrogant architect saying, nope, that's the way I drew it, that's what you got to do. So that goes both ways with the CM and the architect.
I think one other question is how long do you see feasibility site selections taking, and kind of overall timeline for planning?
Well, I thought I saw something in the proposal that there was a really short timeline. I was like, what's that?
Every time?
Yeah, it was like really tight. So I stretched that out. But I also took, in our proposal, now we can get a CM on board, but if you look at the bidding and the construction phasing, depending on the scope of work, I think I stretched that out a couple months. Still being able to hit the construction timeline that we were looking at. It all depends on what we find out there. The idea is we want to look at the program of the building and see how, we want to settle on that program and then see how that fits the sites. But we also know that program, that one building for one site may not work for the other site. We may have to put components and look at circulation and stuff. So depending on what we get into or utility stuff, it's probably a couple months to look at that. I mean, can we tighten that up? Absolutely. Really what it becomes is decisions from this whole group. We're going to bring back information, and we're going to be looking for recommendations or decisions of how you want to move forward. A lot of times it becomes challenging because we bring a lot of information, and you guys can't make a decision right away, and we help you with that. So it's usually not, when we're done with some of our design components, you're going to want a chance to look at that. So there's a little bit of a time frame. We can work fairly quickly, but I think the whole group has to look into that. And we want to do pricing. Pricing is going to be critical too, to make sure we get the right site selection. So that ends up pushing some things out. That's why the envisioning session sometimes helps out when we have a construction manager on board, because they listen and they can hear, and while we're designing, they're putting budget numbers together. I know Gary wants to ask a question. I can see it. Maybe I'll let these guys do it. We have questions. What's that? I would probably use, you've gone through and you've vetted out your team, I would use that CM on board, because it is that critical for them. I mean, to me, I love working with Granger, but if you already have a CM on board, I want him in immediately. I want him to be part of those design discussions. We can do some in-house estimate, we can work with that CM that's there, but it wouldn't make any sense for us to bring in another CM to do some of that estimating if we already have somebody on board. And then, we would just elevate some of the design pieces, but I certainly want to bring that CM over.
So with steel and so far out right now?
Yeah.
You have to start the construction still in the spring. How do you see the construction timeline happening?
Well, we have a lot of projects right now that we're not, we wanted to get things moving for the fall. The bidding climate and materials, roofing, steel is a big one. Those things are being pushed out. Like if we started a project right now, it's probably February until we can actually get moving. It has to do with chemicals and installation and the products coming on site. So that really pushes things out. When we look at, we have to look at the construction type of the building. We look at pre-engineered metal buildings; those are pushed out. So there's a sweet spot with that. We try to look at steel joists. We have a hard time getting, so sometimes we're moving to steel on a lot of the things, or load-bearing masonry, which is a great solution for this type of facility. It's very stable. but those timelines we're putting out, that CM being on board helps us with vetting some of that out and what materials we use, that we can actually, that are good materials to use, but also we can meet those timelines. So it'll be, so the idea is, do you want to be in that market for starting construction in the spring? Is that the intent of the job? You know, so we've got to get moving on things because we have to understand what we're going to build the building on, especially with the market that's here. So it'll be tight. We have to get documents rolling. It's not a big building, but depending on the site that you decide to choose, there might be some other criteria that we're going to bring up, and we'll have to work through that. So our timelines work. There's some material things that certainly we want to get with the CM on board, and how we construct the building.
One thing I'd like to add to that, there's that other element, construction, everyone's focused on construction. There is that data gathering, I guess that's why I'm more focused on that front-end information. Soil borings, getting that information is very critical, as well as site survey information, or if you've got to do any environmental, those are also pushed out now. So with all that in consideration, those are three elements that are critical to do the upfront work that will affect the back work. There's some reasoning, some specifics to why that there's time delay there.
We'll want those as soon as we can. That'll probably, if we're fortunate enough to get the project, that's the first thing I'm going to say is, okay, what's owner responsibility and what's the timing and how can we help get that information out to bidders and get it back so we can get that as reports, because that's the first thing our civil guy is going to ask for. He's going to ask for title. He's going to ask for the alter survey and understanding what's going on the site with the borings. Borings, you know, hopefully with the survey information and the environmental stuff, that'll help, but those are going to be critical. We need that, and we need budget, and then we can do our jobs. See, when I stop talking, it gets quiet. Sorry.
Good, Donna? Patrick?
No.
Thank you.
So hopefully we didn't scare you. Again, we would really love the opportunity to work with you again. Very excited to be here, so definitely appreciate it, and we might try the brewery on the way out. So, we'll have to see. So thank you again. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for the work
Thank
you've
you.
done at Buchanan also.
You bet. I've enjoyed it. It's been a little piece of me, so I just thought I'd share it.
All right, thank you.
And I'm going to send over, I'll send over the PowerPoint, so you guys have that. I'll send that over first thing.
Okay, thank you much.
I've used in the previous
Right.
interviews, so I'll let you guys go ahead and jump right in and
Okay.
do your presentation.
All right. Well, good evening. My name is Dirk Walcotton. I'm an architect and project manager with Abonmarche, and I have, I'll let Corey introduce himself.
Corey Condo, I've been with Abonmarche about 21 years now, something like that. Worked in the city over the years, but it's been a while, and I don't think anyone I've worked with here in the past is probably still around. They're probably retired now.
And I've actually been with Abonmarche since March, but I have about 22 years of experience between architecture and actually did some construction work as a project manager and now consultant for Lakewood Construction on the Common. So I've been on both sides of the coin, the dark side, depending on which side you're talking to. But Corey and I are the main two contacts for this project. Tony McGee, who's going to be with our business development person, was unavoidably had to attend to something else, so we're going to make it tonight. Apologizes, but Corey and I. So I'm the architecture component of this, and Corey is represents the civil side, which are the two main components of the project, as you heard in the last presentation. I don't think that we are going to present anything from the standpoint of the project that you haven't already heard. And so I'm not going to belabor a lot of detail about too many of the things, but we're going to talk about maybe the differences that separate us from the other candidates and how we would work with you as a team. So we're going to focus on your project as well as the team that will be involved. We'll try to keep it succinct and get you deliver. So with that, a little information about, and apologize, I haven't used this system, but so from overview, Abonmarche has been around for quite a while, and we have been doing engineering and architecture for a very long time. We have a combined group that works on engineering, civil, land surveying, landscape architecture, and a very unique component to ours, which has maybe some implication to your Clark Street site, which is we do a lot of coastal waterfront. So we have engineers that are specific to working with floodplains and waterways and right current issues and things like that. We have, I was just updated today, we're at roughly 140 employees through actually now 10 different offices. We have our two main offices, Harbor and South Bend, but we have offices in Goshen and Valparaiso, northwest Indiana, as well as just opening a brand new office in Grand Haven through an acquisition. So very exciting time for us. Lots going on. We're very active in many different projects, all the way from streetscape work and civil road ways. We work with them down under the governmental entities and municipalities in the area. We're actually doing restoration work right now. It's underway in the city of Grand Haven on the lighthouse. So we have some very specific work to do, and we also do some very what we call kind of run-of-the-mill engineering or architecture work. So lots of experience out there. And the people that are going to be on this team for the project, we've selectively gone through and picked people that are specific to the items that are particular to the project. And we read through the RFP, we read through the fact that you want to look at different sites, that one of the sites we investigated is down in the floodplain. The other one may have some environmental issues in terms of soil conditions and things like that. So we wanted to align the people on the team to be able to address those issues, because as I said, yes, we have 140 people and 140 who work on this project.
Yeah, like Dirk said, we have done work in town here in the past. I was trying to think, my memory's not all that sharp for my age, I don't think. But we did Front Street, I wanna say it was back in like 2007, 2008-ish. And then we did some improvements at the wastewater treatment plant back in the John Brown days, and Meg Mullendore days. Donna Southwell, I don't know if any of those guys people are here anymore, but so that's probably, I'm gonna say 2005 to 2008 timeframe. I know we've done a couple of things with developers in town with the Redbud Fitness, just down the road here, and a couple other that same timeframe roughly.
So the team, I would be leading the team. I've head up the project. As I said, I've got 22 years of experience in both construction and architecture. I've done lots of buildings like this, middle buildings, facilities for industrial buildings, and so this is kind of right up my alleyway in terms of the type of construction, the type of program that goes into this. In the architecture, we have some talented people. Gary Flynn, who's got 25 years of experience. He's a local homegrown person out of Buffalo. And Jason Choi, who has actually been a recent acquisition for us, is a recent grad from,
Andrews.
Andrews, thank you. And very talented individual who's going to be helping craft some of this project. Scott Long is our seasoned structural engineer. I will tell you, nothing gets past Scott. He's very articulate. So structure, which is what you want. You want a safe building that's built properly and reinforced and the foundation is correct. Orientation is faster, looking for that. So we have Corey here, and Corey will have Dan working with him. You talk about Dan just briefly.
Yeah, Dan's been with us, I think, 3 or 4 years now, MSU grad, came up to speed really quick. Like I said, I've been with the company 21 years, and I've got a little bit of experience in pretty much everything. From your standard road reconstructs to streetscapes, to parks and recs, to trails, marina waterfront work. I've done a little bit of everything in my time with the company.
And the reason, just real quick before I move on, the reason that I'm spending the time with the team is because, you know, as Buddy mentioned in the previous, all three companies that you're talking to are very accomplished firms, and they can all do the work. I don't think, you know, so Buddy said it, I'm gonna say it, right? There's a level playing field there to some extent. The difference is who you work with and who you feel comfortable with when it comes time to respond to the answers and getting the information that you need. Who stands on it? And so that's why I'm spending the time so that you guys understand we have specifics and good names around the project. Those are the people that you're going to see day in, day out, or you're going to see the names on both the survey. So on the surveying side, Matt, ranking is basically, I mean, Matt is the survey. I mean, if he had a name tag, he'd be Matt's survey ranking. He lives and breathes this stuff every day. He's got several years of experience with this. I can't
He's
remember.
probably 18 years. He's started a couple years after I did, so we got a lot of long-term, a lot of longevity at Abonmarche. It's not uncommon when we go through, we do quarterly kind of work anniversaries, and when they list them off, I'm kind of always surprised on the length of, you know, duration that people have been with the company. So I think that says a lot for the company. We've got employees that want to stay with them. They're happy. They're fulfilled in their dreams of what they do on a daily basis, and I think that goes a long ways.
And what that means for you guys is that you have people that are passionate and committed about what they do. And they're not worried about the jobs when they go back to the office, so they can focus on what needs to be done. Grant administration, as I said, I started here in March, and I'm amazed at how knowledgeable Joelle is with grants. We had a grant, we talked about our grant services that are available. It's not that there would necessarily be a particular item that we're suggesting or recommending in this case, but as you'll see in our process, there is a point that when we do look into this stuff, and Joelle has a feed into all the state, federal funding grants that are out there, and so she will go and bring the project and, you know, all the aspects and sit with her, that's gonna be working on this. There might be a few individuals that, help out from time to time, but these are the main individuals that do 99% of the work. The project understanding, some of this follows with what we gave you in the proposal. I'm just gonna highlight a things, again, I don't wanna repeat too much. But our process is unique. We talked about a phase 1 and phase 2. We wrote phase 1 match for preliminary feasibility studies. Phase 2 is basically drawing of this. And when we looked at those and we broke them up, we highlighted some things that we felt were, as a team, very important, which is mainly the site. In the RFP, it was noted that we wanted to look at those sites. But on top of that, looking at those sites, there was also another component, which was this idea that if you went to the 401 site, that you would be looking at maybe this idea of a municipal complex. And that intrigued us in looking at that. But so as we put together the fee component, which we'll get to in a little bit, and breaking up the phase, we said there's actually quite a bit done in this preliminary phase. To start with, we have 2 sites that has potential floodplain and or some ground soil condition issues. And so we put a lot of our resources and our proposal into that first phase. And I think that's maybe something that's very different than the other proposals that were out there, is that we know that, I can take a napkin and I can draw every building on it and give it to you, and we can get the feasibility, I can slap it on there, and that's about what it's good for, unless you understand the site that you're building. And so we put the resources into the survey and getting soil information up front, included in our price, because without that information, we can design 100 different designs, and it doesn't really matter until you understand what's in the ground and what you're dealing with the floodplain or what the parts of the design. The component, the building component, as we said, so in the first phase, that first step, we're going to be branching off in 2 parallel paths. We're going to be looking at the components of the building itself, programming, working with Mike and the committee to understand how they want to place all the parts and pieces in that. And we work fairly quickly through that process. We do a lot of actually hand sketching. I understand we talk about Revit. We use Revit as well, but Revit, when you get into Revit and you start building things, you need to undo those things. It's very efficient in producing the construction documents. But when you get into that upfront work, sometimes the old ways are still the good ways. And we have some very talented individuals that I work with that where we can produce options and designs quickly, efficiently. We present them to you, they're very clear and concise, and you guys respond back to us very quickly, and we get that information, we can change, modify. We get to a point at that building design where we said, okay, we're down to 2 options, 1 option, this is where we want to go. We sign off on that, and then we pour the resources So number two is an important step. And before I go there, do you want to mention anything about that site investigation?
No, I think you hit pretty much the nail on the head, but I mean, obviously it's a big investment you guys are making, so fully understanding what the pros and cons are of the two sites is obviously gonna be money well spent, before you go and put that type of money toward an investment.
Item two is very important, actually. Select the preferred site location. We're trying to get this information up front so that we can evaluate, even before you talk about putting the building up there, what are the potential investment costs related to just the site information. Obviously, it'll help the process if we can make that, and really we can make a decision as to the site line. The earlier, Corey and his group can dive in on some of the design pieces, before you get too far down the road, right? Along with that, that's really important. I mean, once we've made that selection and we've looked at what the potential site issues are, what some of the design issues are, we can now look at other opportunities like site development alternatives. If Tony was here, he would talk to you about these buyback working with some municipalities where they work with the developer to develop a site with the building and lease it back to the city, saving the city the investment dollars up front, and then lease for a period of time. So those are, we look into those options, we bring those options to the table during the process so that we're not missing any opportunities along with the planning grant funding. If we find sites considered a brownfield or whatever it is, then we'll look at potential funding sources that will support that. And then once we've done that, we get to the preliminary design release, some other options, and we're finding things, we're getting to final design. Once we're in the final design, that's where we're putting together a report. We're finalizing the kind of review with the committee and making sure we get I's and T's dotted and crossed. And then at that point, we move into what we call phase two, the document. There's other components that what we call additional services. It wasn't considered for the RFP, but obviously we can also do the bidding and the CA work. We're working with the CM, right? Obviously we can work with them through this process. It's pretty easy to work with them through this process. We have a number in there figures for third-party estimating. We do some in-house estimating up front to general ballpark. Square foot information in first, work with local CMs to check those numbers and evaluate, make sure we're on the right track. But then ultimately, when we get this together and we've got a selected design, a selected site, then we like to work with a third-party estimator, because that third-party estimator is not your contractor necessarily. If they're outside of it, they're people that we work with out of Indiana, well-invested all over the country in projects. So they have a huge amount of knowledge when it comes to markets and what's going on in marketplaces and trades. And so they put together a very in-depth report that goes from site all the way through light bulbs and put it into flooring, things like that, and everything. Plus, it's included. So, we use a couple. The person that I think we were talking to on this project is Martin Hummel. He's out of Bergmann, Indiana. But when we get to the construction documents, again, the three firms that you're hiring can all be construction documents. The work that needs to happen is amazing. And from our standpoint, it's what are you guys looking for? What do you want, right? This is your building. We are here to facilitate and help you get to and make the right decision. It's not our building, we're not going to utilize it. It's not about what I designed. It's not about what Corey designed and what awards he gets or I get. It's about how satisfied you guys are, not after you move in or provide and build. So to both the sites. Looking at the size of the different acreages, or you want to add, other things?
Yeah, obviously, where the existing facility is there, it's per GIS, which is, people joke and say that means get it surveyed, but the poly line that I put around the site was roughly 21 acres on that existing location there. As Dirk mentioned, a lot of that is in a floodplain, which comes with some caveats and some tricks there. Any construction, new buildings, if they're actually located in the floodplain, they need to be built to a certain level. Usually I think it's 12 inches above that level for public building space. I don't know if the McCoy Creek has a delineated floodway, but if there's a floodway that goes through there associated with the creek, nothing's allowed to be built in that. Another thing to keep in mind, I guess one of the cons I'm going to see on that existing site is anytime you put fill on there of any sort, you have to do per eagle compensating cut to make up that difference. So existing site, I mean, there's some pros for it. You've got infrastructure there, you've got buildings there, you've got investment made, but you've got a lot of challenges with that site, just with the floodplain and the layout down there. There is a little piece of upland property that kind of runs along the south edge of that property next to the tracks that's out of the floodplain. I think that's where your salt storage building is right now. That's really the only upland area on that site. Like I said, you guys have been using that site for years, so the neighbors know you. Moving to the other site, obviously it's roughly half the size. You've got new neighbors that you might have to deal with. We don't know what else potentially exists on that property until we dig into it a little farther. But like Dirk said, doing this kind of initial upfront work and fully understanding the pros and cons to each of these sites is it's gonna be payback. It's gonna be immense. You're gonna have to do that work to really understand what you're dealing with there.
Just some references. So Brian DeSepp, we work with Berrien County, and we're doing some feasibility work for them at this point. Benton Harbor, Ellis Mitchell, we work with them. We are engineer of record with the city, as well as we're doing some, we do code review for them, site planning now, review for applications for the city, half of the city, and the guys in Valiant are some references. I did give Barbara a copy of this on thumb drive, so you guys have to do schedule. Talk a little bit about schedule. We talked about 5 to 7 weeks for the initial, and of course that's in response to the dates that you guys gave us, right? We're trying to strive for getting this done fairly quickly. There are some elements to this, again, the site components, the site components that could push the schedule. I think it's just good to talk about it up front, which is the building programming can probably happen pretty quickly within this time frame. I don't think that's any issue with the site components. Selecting the site, how long the city of Buchanan takes to actually make a decision on the site could cause delay or not, right? It just depends on how quickly the information is gathered. Once that information is brought to the table to review, there's generally a lot of information to sift, and sometimes that can take time and just cause the schedule to lag. So I'm just pointing it out, necessarily as a negative, but just a reality that, I always tell people there's 3 things you never control. Take this as a joke. You have 3 things you never control in property. You can't control the weather, you can't control what's in the ground, you can't control you, right? So in other words, we push, right? You hire us to drive the project, to meet budgets, to meet schedules, right? But if the city needs to take the right time to evaluate, to make the right decision, right? So it's not a negative, it's just, if you have to take that time to make the right decision, then obviously something has to give, and generally it's the schedule that happens. So, yes, can we push to meet the schedule? We set the schedule, but along the way, if things come up or whatever, we, again, are your partners. We're one team, working together. We sit down and talk about that. What does that mean? schedules are funny things, right? They're milestones that we set ourselves up to meet and achieve, because there's money associated with it. But there's also the value sometimes in adjusting that schedule to make sure that we're right in the practices. And we're flexible in looking for that. And try to educate, communicate with the city and the team that when something arises, we don't wait, get on them right away. So at this point, that's our presentation. We're at 30 minutes and 6 seconds, so that's pretty accurate minutes, so I apologize for going over. But at this point, I guess I open up to questions. Fire away.
And with our timeline, do you think acquisition of any grants is realistic on this project?
I think that it would depend on what grant, like if the Brownsville, grant, something related to the flood zone, right, if you're dealing with a federal versus a state, it would depend. Federal, no. State, there are some out there that have quick turnaround processes, and I guess that's why it's upfront investigation on the site, trying to understand what's there quickly is key to this project. It really is. That information is invaluable in terms of moving forward with making the decision about where this project needs to be, as well as what it ends up looking like. I will add one thing. In the RFP, it talked about a municipal complex idea. I formerly actually worked with Wightman and was involved with the Southwest Municipal Complex. I was the project manager on it. That project was complex when you get into city offices and public safety and security that can happen, as well as the DPW facility attached to that. That's very complex. Our proposal, I think we clarified in the proposal that if the decision is made to move in that direction, I think we need to revisit what the fee looks like, because that's a whole different ballgame when you are going to bring multiple departments together on a roof property. That's not really our proposal. So guys, I just clarify that right away up front. Again, we would just revisit and understand the scope and more, even in process it with better understanding and tell you, hey, this is what it's in the process of manage that.
We talked about whoever it was that looks for the grants for
Joelle.
the different areas. Is she just doing a pass along to the city to do the application for that grant, or is she the administrator?
Very good question. So our grant services are overhead services. We don't charge, no fee. Our fee is not, no fee for Joelle, it's a service we provide. And Joelle right now is working with the city of Grand Haven on the lighthouse. The way it works is she will present, if there are opportunities, she will present those opportunities, and walk you through what the pros and cons and ins and outs and deliverables and what the requirements are. You say, yeah, you might say, yes, we want to go for this one, we don't want to go for that one, or, let's just look at this. And once that happens, she assists the city, she will work with the city to work through that process all the way through, including reporting and in finalizing the project.
For the duration of
For the
the
duration
grant,
of the
or not this project?
Right.
Because the
She
grant's
does
gonna be much longer.
yeah, she does a lot of them, and Dirk mentioned, she's excellent at it. She will know what these sites may or may not qualify for. She'll preliminary score them to think if they've even got a chance to make it. And, I don't know how important your timeline is, but if there's grant money available or dollars, a lot of times, that's something that you need to consider.
Spending money now, which is saving some money down the road. Again, walk through that as a team, right, that's part of the process.
I don't think either site is a brownfield at all, right? They have to be declared ahead of time.
Not that I'm aware of, no problem.
So that one's out.
I did have a question, to follow up, I was asking for more clarification on the page where it talks about team value and structure. It mentions facility evaluation services, including CIP and AMP. Can you just give a little more detail about how that component fits into this project at all, and what that looks like?
Yeah, so, I think what we're just doing is what we've done. So we, as part of this project, we will do a facility assessment, right? The existing, one of the components of the RFP is to look at elevation of the existing site and the existing building. And they need to do that to come to a conclusion of whether it's feasible or cost effective to do renovation in the addition. So that's the facility assessment piece, existing building, understanding what's there, and what are the potential costs to renovate the building. That's part of that component. We also do capital improvement, like the CIP, capital improvement plans, so the building can grow and expand, right, that, and then the asset management plan. So understanding specific assets of the building and how to manage those assets of the building. So HVAC units, flooring, that's detailed. We will do a facility assessment as part of that phase. The phase one, understand the renovation, addition, aspects of that. What does it take to build new? And then, of course, that new versus land, site is on, et cetera. So we use a lot of documents. They should know that we use a lot of documents to help us through this process. Everybody always says, we can do this, right? But how do we do it? We start very beginning with scope document, where we basically detail out the scope of work that's being asked of us to do. We send that to the client, have them review and sign that document, and then we use that, and if there's any modifications, changes that happen to that scope, we document that change, because, right, someone wants to add, well, we want to add 2 stalls, 3 stalls, okay, no big deal. Okay, but if we say, well, we're going to add another 40,000 square foot, okay, well, on August 4, we decided to add 40,000 square foot. We send it to them, it's a scope change, and then it's evaluated, is there any cost related to doing that work? Bath install, 40,000 square feet, yeah, probably. We can probably look at additional resources, so we track and communicate along the way, and again, it's a partnership. We have that document, but we don't just keep it here, we just share it, and we want to copy of it. And everybody has to do 2 minutes, and update those minutes, we have an active process where if something doesn't get resolved in town, it's added to the next agenda item. So the track changes. It's all got to be on the paper, right?
Sort of as a follow-up to that, is there an end product related to the CIP and AMP that we would just keep as the city that we could use for budgeting and?
Absolutely. Our facility analysis will always use a spreadsheet. That spreadsheet will have grading, hierarchy, priorities, as well as evaluation. In that document, share with you.
Patrick, Ralph, Donna? Okay.
I have one question still. Question for Corey, since you've been there so long. You hit a hiccup on a project. Walk me through that process when you're working with that construction manager.
Well, I'd like to first kind of do an assessment on if it was an engineering oops or if it's something out of my control. I'm a pretty likable guy. Contractors generally get along with me. I've had tried to make a few of them mad, because, you know, to prove our point and not be a pushover. But, I'm calm, you know, collected. We'll talk through the issue, if there's ramifications to cost or schedule. And, you know, if it's my fault, I'll fess up to it, and we'll make it right. You know, we've as Abonmarche, we've admitted mistakes, we've eaten the cost on those mistakes. So we're not gonna wash our hands of it, we're not gonna say, well, sorry, you know, I didn't catch that, and put that on the contractor. We'll own it.
All right, so any other questions? No? Okay. I believe with no other questions.
Thank you for the
Thank you, guys.
opportunity to be here tonight, and yeah, we would be extremely excited to be a part of the next project.
Wonderful.
See it successfully.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your
Thank
time.
you very much for being here.
Thank you. All right, well, I gotta do the, let's, yeah, I think that's a first, right? You did good, yeah. Must be something about me.
For non-agenda items, so, Brandon, if you're, yeah, Brandon, we saw you talking. Okay, I know that. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, how about the just the, yeah, I'm just saying, around here, 63 I just want to commend all of you for the time and effort that you have to put in to do this job. It's just to sit here and witness in the amount of packets that you have to go through, the reading material and the understanding. I don't think you ever get enough appreciation. So I'm just saying I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. Makes it all worth it.
Kindness from that. It's true.
Won't tell your wife.
Gosh, she's kidding.
Okay. Not seeing anybody else approaching the mic or the table, I will take a motion to adjourn.
A motion.
Do I have a support?
I'll support.
Wonderful rope.
It was swimming money.
She's still catching up with the in-person thing. She was used to the voices.
It sounded different over
It did sound
video.
different.
Okay. Downey?
Yes.
Money?
Yes.
Swam?
Yes.
Whedon?
Yes.
Donald?
Yes.
Cornell? Carries.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you for the
And thank you
pizza.
for the pizza.
Yeah, thank you for the pizza.
Ralph?
Yeah, thank you, Ralph. And
Thanks, Ralph.
Oh, yeah.
Donna for the pizza.
Yeah.